Much of my audience is evangelical. I have found evangelical Christians usually are the most sort of open-minded, more tolerant group than you're going to get almost anywhere else. So I would say I'm doing a
you have to be careful
similar...
with those words, Dave. Tolerant is the word that's almost equivalent to woke.
Right.
That we serve an almighty God, and he commands us to care about the nation that we are in.
People need to be equipped on how to live out their faith in the public square.
Muslim, Hindu, Christian. There are different paths.
They really tackle head-on all those really big issues no one wants to talk about.
You explained the difference, as you saw, between Aboriginal traditional religion and Christianity, saying they were incompatible. I actually tend to agree with you.
We're not hearing this stuff in our churches.
The most important thing we can do is to win souls for Jesus Christ.
They are cutting to the quick with the word of God.
The second most important thing is to make sure we can still do the first thing.
Well, welcome to Church and State. I'm Dave Pellowe, and today it's my great privilege to be sitting down with the one and only Dave Rubin. Dave, from this Dave, welcome.
You know, it's funny. I've got a lot of Daves in my life. Almost everyone I work with is named Dave. Every time I go somewhere, the name Dave has become ubiquitous throughout the world. So it is always good to be with another Dave, and looking forward to chatting with you.
You are coming down to Australia very soon. We're excited to see you again. You do a lot of work with John Anderson, one of our much-loved Australian thinkers. Tell us about the tour dates and which cities you'll be visiting this time.
Sure. Well, I'm really excited about this trip. One of the things we've been trying to do with my show for the last 8 or 9 years or so is do at least one big international trip a year. And a few years ago, around 2018, I did about 10 days in Australia, which, you've got such a massive country that, 10 days really isn't enough, especially when you factor in, travel from the States as well. But I did 10 days with Jordan Peterson there, and I just absolutely fell in love with Australia. I mean, the people, the weather, the sense of life. Now, obviously, this was pre-COVID, and you guys had some strange things, let's say, happen during COVID, especially from what I understand in Melbourne particularly, but really all over the country. And subsequently, I think there's some interesting political things that are similar in some ways to some of the things we have going here. But I just felt an affinity to the people. I mean, there was a feeling, like the sense of humor kind of, it feels like America, just like a little adjacent. There's a sarcasm, there's a zest for life. I'm here in the free state of Florida where we're wrestling alligators all day long. You guys are boxing kangaroos. There was just something that I really became attached to, and I don't feel that in all the countries that I go to. And then for my first book, which came out in 2020, I was supposed to be on tour, and the only international stops we were going to do were Australia. We were going to do about 8 or 9 shows in Australia, and then unfortunately that got canceled because of COVID. So we've been working on this for quite some time. We'll be in Australia for about 10 days. The 3 main theater shows that I'm doing, Melbourne on October 18th, Sydney October 21st, Brisbane on October 27th, and then I'm doing a few other private events and things with John Anderson and some other Australian personalities. And it really is for me to, we're going to shoot a little mini documentary about the country. From an American perspective,
interesting.
We know the cliche things about your country, right? We know about Crocodile Dundee, and we know about, the koalas and, all that kind of stuff. But I really, especially to the backdrop of COVID, where I saw so many, I would say, dystopian things coming out of Australia that seemed so different from the spirit of Australia that I knew. I was really interested in it, and we have a huge, I think our 4th largest country of viewership, I think, is Australian, which is pretty great. So I'm really looking forward to it.
What will you be? Is there a particular theme or issues that you're wanting to unpack and explore with audiences in Australia?
My general style and the way I do this show, my daily show, is that I wake up in the morning and we kind of just piece it together on the fly. We sort of feel what's going on culturally, what's happening on, X/Twitter, what are people talking about? And we try to write a narrative show around that. I think when we do these theater shows, we're going to do something similar to that. I'm going to really try to write a live show that morning, and we're going to have video that'll be played in the theaters, and we'll try to do a little bit of audience interaction. And I'm sure you're going to bring up something about my friend Charlie Kirk, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But one of the things that when I was on tour with Charlie years ago that he loved to do, that I've always incorporated into my shows, is that if you disagree with me when we get to the Q&A portion, I'd rather have that person come up first and ask questions than someone who just is up there to say nice things or say, Dave, you were great, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, that's nice. But I'd much rather open it up to audience, not in a hostile way. Hopefully people can do it as respectfully as possible. But we're going to write them live. We also have some studio space in a couple of the cities, so we'll still do my normal daily live show from Australia, although our time shift is going to be a little out of whack, but we'll make that work. And really, I want to just get to know the audience. One of the things that I really like about Australian audiences also, which is very different than European audiences, but more similar to American audiences, if you're in a live room with them, they'll mess around with you. You can play with the crowd, and they're willing to get in it and yell and heckle and get a little kind of crazy. European audiences are very proper. They see you there as the performer. They're there in their chairs, and they're just going to sit there. Australian audiences, I found, had much more of the American quality, which I really like. So, every show is going to be completely different. It's going to, as I said, it'll be written that day, and we'll go around. I want to learn. I'm really curious. There's so many things about your country, a giant landmass that is its own continent, that has an incredibly rich history, yet has some of the cultural strife that we have in America as it pertains to immigration and integration of certain populations. What did happen during COVID? There's a lot to talk about, and I think it'll sort of present itself as we're there.
Australia really revealed itself to be far more different to America than I wanted. Prior to 2020, like you're saying, in 2018, I thought we were so much kindred spirits, love of freedom and capitalism, the entrepreneurial spirit, the distrust of authority. It's almost a cliche Australian, and I found it was a total lie. Come 2020, we found Australians were desperately in love with government. We hate politicians, but government is a public utility we can't live without, like electricity and water. And that's not my opinion, but the people, even in my own church, very conservative people who manifested this blind trust in government that can only be described as statism, to the subjugation of their own thinking, really, really, well, it depressed me. It shocked me, but it also depressed me. The nation, and it explains so much about some of the reasons entrepreneurialism can struggle sometimes in Australia. It's almost a socialist mentality.
Well, that's part of the reason why we wanted to go back, because I was there in 2018, as I said, and I felt this incredible kinship and just joy and fun. And, obviously I did the beaches and I did all the stuff with the animals and all of that stuff that was there, and had great food and, drinks and out at bars with audience members. And we just had an absolute blast. And the last show that Jordan and I did there was at the Sydney Opera House, which was the afternoon. It was our only matinee show. About 120 shows we did together, and just stunningly gorgeous, beautiful day. The theater was incredible. So I left the country on such an unbelievable high. So then to see what happened during COVID, and then I would say even a few years later, less than 2 years ago, right to the backdrop of October 7th, to see those videos outside the Sydney Opera House, right where I had stood, where there was mobs of what I have no problem calling jihadists, Islamists, whatever you want to call them, talking about gas the Jews. I couldn't really put those two things in my brain together. They don't really make sense from this country that I'm certainly not an expert in everything Australian, but I just couldn't put that together. And that's when this presented itself of kind of where we were going to go. And we looked at a few other places. I just thought, let's just dive back in, because what did happen, it doesn't compute, I think, for the average American when you have the sort of stereotype of the way we think of Australians, that you guys went in on that authoritarian angle. But, you know, the line that you just said, I've heard before from Australians: we hate politicians, we love government. And that's an interesting thing to unpack.
It really is, and it says, I mean, it's said a whole lot about our culture, the whole COVID experiment, then the whole October 7, you know, not an experiment but tragedy. That's also begun to reveal a very, very dark character to the Australian culture, and I can't help but blame the policy of multiculturalism, the experiment of bringing in vast numbers of people from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East really only started in the 90s, and it has substantially changed the character of our demographic, culminating in displays like the so-called March for Humanity across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, as well as just the visceral hatred displayed at the Opera House just 2 days after that horrific genocidal terrorist massacre in Israel. Something else that's reflected a lot on the cultural moment we find ourselves in the West, especially in America, was, as you mentioned, the assassination and martyrdom of your friend and an incredibly influential character, Charlie Kirk. When I'm teaching, one of my core missions is to help churches and Christians not be afraid of politics, but actually, with egos divested, pursue truth together in humility and make truth the objective, not winning, and not partisanship, but the pursuit of objective truth. And when that's your goal, we can do that without acrimony and without causing divisions. And it's good for a church to seek to stay united and an integrated, cohesive community, and that plays out in a national scale as well. But this assassination says something that's, again, a moment to grieve for what it says about our culture.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to say here. You know, just Charlie was a friend of mine first, and that, you know, one of the things that's a bizarre part of being a media personality is you usually talk just about events or people that maybe you've interviewed, but there's a separation between that and your personal life. Charlie and I, not only did we tour together and do these college events together for years, we did dozens and dozens of these. But, you know, he was at my house last year for a cup of coffee. You know, we broke bread many times, went out to dinner many times, all of those things. So, you know, it wasn't just, oh, here's this guy in the distance that I know sort of that got killed. I mean, this was my friend that got killed. And he was killed for the very reasons that we started working together years ago. When Charlie and I met years ago, around 2017, I was on the left and he was on the right. And we thought it would be fun. It was actually him, really. He thought, well, this will be fun. You know, Dave, you're a decent lefty. Most lefties are sort of hysterical and crazy, but you seem more like an old school liberal. Why don't we go to colleges and talk it out? And I really respected the fact that Charlie was willing to make that move. He was welcoming me into his world, even though I had counter ideas. And I'll also really credit Charlie in that, you know, over the years, our differences, political differences, really, really narrowed. When they started like this, they really narrowed over the years. And that's credit to him. I mean, he brought me closer to his opinions than I brought him. I do think I shifted him on some things or gave him a slightly different perspective on a few things. But in terms of policy positions, I definitely moved more to the right than he did, say, to the left. That's also partly because so many people on the left have gone bananas and really are all on the right now, but maybe we can punt that for the moment. What this has done as it pertains to what you talked about there, look, Charlie was a man of faith. He had no problem talking about his faith. That can be very difficult from a political perspective, but he really, I thought, in the most beautifully elegant way, was able to blend his philosophical and religious view of the world with how do you also govern from a largely secular position of a country that has 350 million people if you don't want that government to be a religious theocracy, which he did not want, and to constantly have to put that jigsaw puzzle together. and not compromise his religious beliefs, but then also understand that we're going to be in a country where people are going to have different faiths than him, different lifestyles than him, and all of those things. He really did it quite elegantly. I think that right now, with him gone, there is a hole. We have a hole in our discourse. We already had a big hole in our discourse in America, as I'm sure you do in Australia and all over the world in the West. We're all struggling with that. You know, we're in our own bubbles and all of those things. Charlie was one of the few voices that was bridging. He was bridging the left-right divide. He was bridging the religious-secular divide, and probably some others. And I'm trying my best to fill those shoes to whatever extent I can.
Good. To your point of admiration for Charlie in figuring out how to avoid a theocracy, I don't want to overstate my knowledge of American history, but I'm a fan, and I think reformation of both the way Australia has gone and America has gone to the way we were each founded is the solution. And America was founded not as a theocracy, but it was founded with a firm conviction by many, if not most, of the founding fathers that an essential ingredient of the American self-government experiment was a virtuous and religious people, a sense of morality that said, it's very libertarian. It said, first and foremost, we have to govern ourselves. There's no constitution which is capable of restraining the extremes of human passion and emotion and irrationality if it doesn't start with a high level of self-government to begin with. We've seen democracy attempted to be transplanted to cultures which are not compatible with Christianity, and it fails spectacularly because the people need a dictator. They're just, it's a horrible thing to say. It sounds patronizing, but it's manifestly demonstrated in how the experiments have gone time and time again in the Middle East. There's much more stability in the society when there's a tyrannical dictator at the top of the tree, or a benevolent dictator. It doesn't matter. But you know, your second president, John Adams, even while in office, said our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people, and it's wholly unsuitable to the government of any other. I think what Charlie Kirk's assassination has demonstrated is that John Adams was right in rejecting God, in rejecting the morality of the Bible. And I'm not even talking, I'm certainly not talking about mandating any kind of devotion to God. But in making that decision, Americans have, in the West, I'm not picking on Americans, but this assassination happened there. We're just proving, and you think about all the madness that you talk about and interview all the time, all the wokeness, all the gender theory, all the mutilation of body parts by people trying to get surgery to affirm their feelings, the mental illness crisis going on, the suicide rates, life expectancy reducing for the first time in history instead of increasing. All of these things have an uncanny correlation with a decline in religious devotion, and I can't help but think that it's causation.
So obviously we could do 10 hours on this, obviously, you know, and many great thinkers have talked about this endlessly. So I'll say a couple of things. So first off, look, our founders did something incredible in our founding documents that you referenced, which is that they talked about God-given rights. They didn't say, oh, man wrote these documents, thus you have rights. They said your rights are innate to you. Now, we can have the endless debate about whether, you know, there's a humanistic version of it, that it's innately human, and whether you believe that God is a separate thing that puts morality in the universe and all those things. But they're the broadest point, if we were trying to bumper sticker this for the most amount of people, in the broadest sense, what they meant was, we, man, did not give you these rights. What we can do is create the conditions to protect these rights. That is so brilliant. It is so brilliant and impactful and important.
Agreed.
We can create a structure that will protect what God gave you. Now, we are all not going to agree on what God means, right? But the protection of that is absolutely brilliant. So that's one thing. Now, as to whether a purely secular society can exist in the long term, well, look, we don't have we have societies that have come and gone over thousands of years, but America, from an American perspective, let's say we're about to roll into our 250th anniversary. We're quite a young nation, actually, and we were founded sort of to the backdrop of the Enlightenment. And most of our founders, they were very wary, obviously, of overarching government. They were trying to escape the king. That's one thing that was obvious. But to your point, most of them were believers and were religious to some extent or another. But they also were writing documents that wanted to free people from state-imposed religion.
That's
so
right.
again, to bring it to the Charlie thing, they were trying to do very complex, often competing things at the same exact time. Now, if you were to ask me, do I think that a state can function on purely secular grounds? I actually think that the answer to that probably is yes, but it has to be probably an absurdly tiny country that is largely monolithic. And they don't have to all be the same religion or skin color, but it has to be like hyper controlled in some sense. Because once you add the multicultural part, you have too many competing interests that will fray all that. So I think what we're suffering from, which I think you're suffering from to some degree, Western Europe is suffering from a massive degree, is that the leftists, the Marxists, the Islamists, this red-green alliance, they came in, and the tolerant liberals, and I mean liberal in the good sense of the word liberal, which I think most Australians understand. For Americans, the word liberal has gotten really screwy. They came into liberal societies and they just looked at the liberals and they looked at these people who were westernized and successful and had all of the fruits of capitalism. And they were like, boy, their eye is off the ball right now. These guys are successful. They're doing all these things. They have hobbies. They're not even worried about who's guarding the door anymore. And we're going to come in and ransack the entire thing. So look, I don't admire what these people have done in any way. They have done evil things to great countries, but I do admire their tenacity in doing it. They accomplished something, and that is worth noting. Because you can't just dismiss them as all ridiculous or evil, because then you're missing the point. It's like, if they're all ridiculous and stupid and evil, well, look what they did. They did it on our watch. So as per the secular versus religious argument, I think Charlie's position was right. Charlie, there's a great video that you've probably seen of Charlie where a rather, for lack of a better term, a rather anti-gay young man is asking Charlie some questions. And Charlie basically says, look, he has his biblical view of marriage, and he also doesn't want the government to dictate what private citizens can do. He doesn't want to live in a religious theocracy. So what he's doing there is he's doing what humans have done for all time. He's taking a set of beliefs and then also understanding that he doesn't have dominion of other people. And hopefully we can live in a society that will respect as many of us as possible. It is very tricky, and it's more sorely needed right now than it was even 3 weeks ago, because now we don't have them.
You agree with everything you've said, I think, which is probably disappointing, but we can maybe try and make it more controversial.
Let's see what we can figure out here. Come on.
Look, obviously you're an atheist, and I'm as Christian as Charlie Kirk was.
I'm no longer an atheist, just for the record. I was years ago, but for at least 5 years now, I've been a believer. Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask you more about that? I might have missed that announcement. Is it private?
No. I about 2019. There was a series of reasons, but I would say the easiest version of it, just in the interest of time, is that I was on tour with Jordan Peterson, and Jordan, I think, has brought belief back to more people than probably anyone certainly in our lifetimes, I think. And once you hear the arguments enough, one of the arguments that I really liked for Jordan's position on belief, it's a bit utilitarian for some people, but I think it's quite good, which Jordan said that, when he was in his mid-20s, he thought, if I tell the truth for the truth's sake, that ultimately will be the best way to put order in the universe. It doesn't mean that good things are going to happen all the time, but ultimately it will have to be the best of all outcomes. It's sort of like, Solzhenitsyn would say, the best thing that in essence, the best thing you can do as a person is stop participating in the lie. But to believe that telling the truth for the sake of the truth is a worthy endeavor, that is a leap of faith. There's no reason to believe that just fighting for the truth is inherently good. There just is no reason to believe that. But you have to take the leap of faith that the truth is in and of itself an eternal good. And I think that once I started with that, then some of the other doors just start opening up.
So do you find yourself a Christian or a deist, a religious Jew? Where do you find yourself on this journey?
Well, I'm Jewish. I don't think I'm particularly religious, although in light of Charlie's death, one of the things I promised to do is keep the Sabbath, which we're now 3 Fridays in, and I've done that so far. We're obviously, as we're taping this right now, we're in the midst of the high holidays, which are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's the Jewish New Year and the Day of Atonement, which I've been honoring that as well, trying to figure out some of the traditions that I'm doing with my family, which we've done for years, but trying to take them a little more seriously. I love having the conversations with people of all different faiths. I particularly, it's interesting. Charlie was an evangelical Christian. Much of my audience is evangelical. I have found evangelical Christians usually are the most sort of open-minded, more tolerant group than you're going to get almost anywhere else. So I would say I'm doing a
you have to be careful
similar...
with those words, Dave. Tolerant is a word that's almost equivalent to woke.
Right. Let's say tolerant. How about old school tolerance, when it just meant, kind of live and let live? How about that? You're right, because tolerant and diverse have all been co-opted here.
As an evangelical Christian myself, I hate it when people try and tell me that Jesus was tolerant. I'm like, are you kidding? He came to the woman caught in sexual immorality, and he said, I'm not going to participate in your execution right now, but you really need to go and stop living like that.
Maybe, all right, you know what? For the purposes of this, I'll hedge this in a way that I think you will appreciate, which is that during COVID, one of the things that I found was that wherever I went, where there were evangelicals, they were more skeptical of the government. They were more skeptical of what was going on because they believed in something else. And once I saw that, and that's what I mean about a utilitarian purpose for belief. Yeah. Some people have an innate ability to just believe. Like it's like sort of. I don't mean this in the way it's going to sound exactly like it's almost childlike in a sense, but I don't mean that in a negative connotation. Like they can just they can just believe. I just believe this, and that's enough, and I can believe it. Yeah. I think my sense of belief is more utilitarian in that in that it's functional. So again, what I said with Jordan related to that. But then during COVID, where I was, even though I lived in California, I spent a decent amount of time in Florida during COVID, and now I live in Florida. There's a lot of evangelicals here. These were the people that were fighting the lockdowns the most. And I couldn't disconnect the fact that the people who were fighting authoritarianism were believers. So there's something about that. And that's what I mean by the utilitarian part.
I've found a Charlie Kirk quote which perfectly summarizes what I've been working on since 2016. And that is, the most important thing is the winning of souls, to win souls for the kingdom of God, for Jesus. The second most important thing is to protect our ability to do the first thing. And that speaks to the need to promote and protect a pluralistic, liberal, inclusive democracy where government stays out of people's homes, stays out of people's wallets, stays out of people's churches and devotions, and really sets up the kind of self-government democracy that America's founding fathers and Australia's founding fathers really, really believed in, that government can't mandate a religion and it can't punish a religion, and everybody gets to bring their whole selves to the democratic discourse. But to the point of and I'd really love to, just respecting time, I would love to go further into your spiritual and philosophical journey. Maybe we can make it a sequel for another day. But the balance between theocracy and democracy is exactly what Charlie was doing. is let me, not the government, try and persuade you of the moral compass, moral values, philosophical reality, metaphysical unavoidabilities that God is a personal relationship God and requires things from you, starting with self-discipline, self-government, not self-government in a democratic sense, but self-government in the private, personal. No one needs to tell me to do the right thing, because even when no one's looking, I care about what God thinks about what I'm doing. In that sense of self-government, what Charlie Kirk was evangelizing was that this personal faith with Jesus is critical for your own health, but it's also critical for the national health. Now, government has no role in preaching that. It's in the interest of government to protect and nurture that, but never to mandate or establish that in any kind of official way. Jump in.
Well, you're saying a few things that remind me so deeply of Charlie and even Charlie's evolution, because, years ago when Charlie and I started going to these campuses, the shirts that we were giving away were "Big Government Sucks." Now it's a fairly obvious statement, right? It's secular in nature, right? Government, this thing that's on top of you sucks. Okay.
I had a piece of merch that said "Government is the pandemic."
Right. So same notion, right? So it's like, oh, there's this thing out there. Stop giving it power. Stop praying to it. It's too controlling and authoritarian and whatever. Over the years, Turning Point shifted a little bit and then started doing more of the spiritual stuff that you're talking about. But what Charlie never did was demand that people believe what he believed by the sword. What he thought was, Amen. I think, what you laid out quite well there, which was basically he thought if he told people what his own journey was, that perhaps they would get on their own journey. And I would say that's very similar to what Jordan Peterson has been doing over the years. Jordan probably with a little more, Charlie's discipline was sort of religious and political. Jordan's was religious and scientific in that he was a clinical, not anymore, but was a clinical psychologist. So I really like being around people in general that can hold two often thought of as competing notions and also understand. I mean, to understand that you live in a country that people are going to really be different than you. And you better damn well be tolerant of that in the true sense of tolerance, because otherwise someone is not going to be tolerant of you. Now, the problem that the liberals have faced, which also gets to your earlier question, the problem that the liberals have faced is they just decided to be tolerant of everything. So when all of the bad ideas came in and we said, okay, we're going to import all of these people who in many cases would love to behead you or rape your women or take over your streets or burn down your cities, or we're going to tell people that they should teach kids that 5-year-olds are not the gender that they were born with, or all these things, the liberals just didn't have enough juice to stop them. This is the Karl Popper paradox of tolerance, right? You can't be tolerant of intolerance, right? You must be tolerant of intolerance, but you want to be as tolerant as possible. This is the paradox, right? And we all have to play within that. My hope, to the backdrop of Charlie no longer being with us, is that those of us in the West who understand basically what you and I are talking about here are going to start doing some work to fix these things. Because, if we don't, I mean, then I think the real danger could seep in, which is that the theocratic version of this, which would demand submission, that could take root. And by the way, it is taking root in the name of Islam throughout most of Western Europe.
You know what? I hate. I want to use the word theocracy. What you call theocracy, I hate. What I call theocracy is self-government, is that God rules me.
Sure. So I'm trying to do it in the bumper sticker version. I understand what you mean
What I would call what you're describing ecclesiocracy, where a church has the power of dictatorial administration. And I don't like that at all. But here's what I know. Here's what I absolutely know. There is no system of government, not anarcho-capitalism, not libertarianism, not conservatism, not capitalism, not socialism, not communism, not Marxism. There's no system of government, not monarchy, constitutional monarchy, absolute monarchy. Nothing works when the person who wields the power has a corrupt and selfish heart. When the people, when it's a democracy, the people who hold the power are multiplied throughout all voting participants. If they're corrupt, I mean, democracy is going to be tyrannical if the hearts of the rulers, the people, are corrupt. And that's why the gospel, what Charlie preached and so many people before him, is absolutely critical. It's because we need a reformation of hearts to be humble and just fearlessly pursue truth. Like, the best thing that can happen if I'm wrong is for you to persuade me that I'm wrong, because now I'm relieved of the liability of ignorance. And if you persuade me that I'm wrong, I don't lose, I win. I leave a better person, and our country has a better chance of becoming secure and cohesive and stable. And so this is I think the ideal theocracy, where God rules me and multiple people don't have that decision imposed on them, but they voluntarily choose it. And this is all throughout America's creeds. I wish Americans actually believed one nation under God.
Look, if we had a time machine, I always say on my show, if we could just reverse back to 1995 America, was everything perfect? No, of course not. There's no perfect system. People are imperfect. We can't make perfect systems. It is what it is. But we really didn't have racial strife. We had put to bed most of these issues. If you would have said to the most radical gay activist, do you want transgender surgeries for 5-year-old boys to become girls? They would have said you're completely crazy. They were fighting for marriage equality. Now, you as a religious Christian may not be for that in your religious view, but clearly I would imagine you could see a difference between that fight versus the idea that you're going to mutilate children, right? So we basically took a system that got as close to putting things to bed. You and I look like we're roughly the same age. I'm 49 years old. I grew up as a Gen Xer in a time when it was not cool to be racist. It wasn't cool to hate anybody. We had put that stuff to bed in America. The 80s were our boom of success and capitalism and creativity. And every week there was a new great movie and a new video game. And we just did it right in America in the sense of capitalism and freedom. That rolled into the 90s. And then it really was in the early 2000s. And some could argue they took over the institutions even before that. So a lot of the seeds had been planted at the Ivy League schools for a lot of this nonsense. But basically, then they pretty much decided, we're going to find every little instance of perceived hatred or perceived racism or whatever, and we're going to blow it up. And then again, because we were so successful as a nation, because we were just living our lives, I think they really took advantage of that. And we have to figure out what do we do now? What do we do to purge this? And I'll just say one other thing related to this, which is that one of the things that I've been very proud of over the last couple of years is that when Trump tried to create this really wide tent MAGA coalition where he brought in all of these disaffected liberals, Joe Rogan is not a conservative. Bobby Kennedy was a Democrat 2 years ago. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat. Elon Musk was a Democrat. I was a Democrat. Trump really tried to widen that tent. And what I've tried to do is hold that tent as much as possible. So I'm probably on the more liberal side, let's say, of the MAGA tent. But there is absolutely every reason to think that the old school liberal that fits within MAGA can fruitfully and joyously live in the same country as the religious conservative. That's a hard thing to fight for. There's going to be competing interests, but it is a worthy fight, and I think it's the fight that Charlie was taking the mantle on.
Most of what you've said, I got no problems with. There's a couple of clarifications or theories I'll just add.
Sure.
I think you're 100% right. The further back we go in time, the better. The 90s would be fantastic. Please, let's take us there again, where we weren't so voraciously mutilating children in the name of equality. But
or even borders. You mentioned it before. It was your country did not do these crazy things with borders in the 90s. We play videos on my show all the time of Democrats in the 90s talking about closing borders, kicking out illegals, crime off the streets. I mean, again, it's the fault of the liberal that just abandoned their principles. Actually.
There's a really great quote from Obama in his book, which talks about how uncomfortable he is with flags from foreign nations being flown on patriotic days in America. I mean, we've come so far so rapidly, but I don't think the slippery slope is a fallacy. I think this started more than a century ago. People say you want to take Australia or America, you want to take society back to the 50s. I'm like, I do wish we could go back to the 50s, because that would be back to the future. Where we've gone is not progressive, it's regressive. The family policy of this century's Western nations is much closer to the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution than it is progress. There's so many parallels. In the name of equality, family has been utterly destroyed. Now, equal moral value for men and women, 100% agree with. Imago Dei, we all bear the image of God, and that neither is inferior or superior to the other. But if equal means the same, we're not the same. We're designed different, we're functionally different, we have different roles, and we're complementary. That is, now the minute we started erasing differences in the name of equality and promoting what's essentially equity, not equality, that I think was just a slippery slope. And so, where we've ended up has just been one step further, one step further, one step further. The constant nature, the ratcheting effect of cultural Marxism to a never-ending regression of moral standards, which, if we care about truth and if we acknowledge that God exists, I think it's the ultimate in humanistic vanity to think that God's moral values change with the whims and trends of our culture.
Well, I think probably the best example that people could that you could connect to what you're talking about is look what the feminists did. The feminists once were fighting for equal rights under the law, and they wanted to make sure that they would have the same protections as men and they could vote and all of those things. Now, I know there's a certain percentage of people that don't think women should vote and all that, but if you basically believe in individual rights, okay, so you want women to be equal, fine. So it was the feminists fighting for women. But what does the modern feminist now fight for? The modern feminist now fights for a biological boy's ability to beat a girl in wrestling or in basketball or swimming or whatever it might be, despite all of the obvious differences that we all know, that it's not based in bigotry or anything else. The feminists should be fighting harder now. If you were a true feminist, first wave feminist, you would be fighting radically against the trans ideology. Ironically, if you were a true gay rights activist in the 90s who was fighting for marriage equality, you should be fighting radically against the trans ideology, because they're the ones that are chemically castrating an effeminate young boy or a girl who likes G.I. Joe more than she likes Barbie. So again, it gets to this weird. So I can get on board most of what you said as it pertains to the slippery slope, but I would directly connect that to the failure of liberals to defend liberalism, which is why years ago I started tweeting out a line about how defending my liberal values is becoming a conservative position. Now that might be, and people have made the argument, I've heard it plenty of times, that might be that there just is a flaw in liberalism in and of itself. That probably is for a second conversation for us to have. I do think the classically liberal project, which largely is the project of America, it can work, and even for all its flaws of America right now, we're basically under that umbrella, and it still is working for all of the problems. But that's for a much larger conversation.
Yeah, Dave Rubin, I so appreciate the opportunity to fight beside you. I'll do it any day to fight for a return to sanity in the Christian West. And I wish you all the best on your personal, philosophical, and spiritual journey, as well as your tour.
Well, Dave, I have no doubt that our work is cut out for us. But as I always say, I have nothing better to do than save the world. So why not, right?
Yeah, very true indeed. Well, Dave Rubin is going to be in Brisbane on the 27th of October. I will be there with seats closest to the front that I can get. He's going to be all throughout the east coast of Australia, Melbourne on the 18th of October, Sydney on the 21st, and Brisbane on the 27th. He'll be touring with Peta, Credlin, John Anderson, and British journalist Andrew Neil. Why would you bring a British journalist to Australia?
There might be some other Australian surprises. I have a feeling my friend Rita Panahi from Sky News might be joining us. Maybe some others. We'll see who we can pull out there.
That'll be
I
amazing.
think Andrew just happened to be in Australia.
Very cool. You should get your tickets now where I'm getting mine, daverubin.com/events. It's really important, if we're going to save the West, that we participate, not just observe, and we support the people who are leading the discourse. And people like Dave coming from the left and willing to talk seriously and sincerely and with civility is exactly the kind of conversations we need to promote and protect. So I'll see you there. Dave Rubin, thank you so much for your time.
Drinks on me.